Well, here we go. Another Wednesday on From Where God Sits. Hopefully, this is actually it should be the daily dose. How about that? That's better. Oh my. So I hope everyone's doing okay today uh, on this Wednesday. Um, I don't know about you, but it has didn't mean to get that slide up there quite so quick. I don't know about you, but uh, this time makes me wonder what day of the week it is. So it's Wednesday. Usually I have a Rotary meeting and I hang out at Panera in the morning. But these days it's just the same thing over and over again. Hey, Joanne, good to see you on here. Thank you. I am feeling some better. Those of you that were on here yesterday, I shared that I had been struggling with stomach cramps and not feeling very well. And I ask you to pray, so I appreciate your prayers. I do feel better today. I inherited the digestive problems of my dad, um, so I can thank him for that. So I struggle some with those kinds of things. So thank you, Debbie. I did. I'm interested. I got a new mic, and I think I got it working right. And I'm interested to hear if it sounds any different to you all. Um, um, uh, I was hoping it would pick up better, have a little bit better quality. Um, so if you could just comment there, tell me if you could tell the difference from what we've done previously. So um, I see some other people. Kelly's on, and Wendy and Jody. And Kelly says, greetings from the scorching hot desert of Tucson. Yeah, you can have it. Um, Debbie Olenek is on. Yeah, I know you can't see me. Um, Here, let me see what I can do here. How's that? Thank you. Thank you for letting me know that. Is that better? I know this technology. I think maybe that portrait of me looks a little bit better than me, though, huh? Well, today, um, my hat is from Alaska. If you can see that, I don't know how well the picture's coming across, but struggling with this hair issue. Um, I'm wearing a hat that we bought in Alaska. So 2000, let me give you a little history. Pam Black, it's much better. Uh, does that mean the sound is much better, Pam? I'm really interested to hear what this, I thought you were, yeah, well, that would be one way to hide my hair, wouldn't it, Katie? Um, yeah, so does it sound any different with this mic or does it sound about the same? I'm not even sure it's accessing the right mic, so, um, but it sounds good. Okay. So today's hat is from Alaska in 2012. We went on a cruise to Alaska. I had talked to Sheila for years. I said, wouldn't it be nice to take a cruise like the Caribbean to to someplace? And she flat out refused to go because she has a problem with motion sickness. Now, some people have motion sickness. Sheila has motion sickness. She feels it on elevators and escalators. And when we were still in, uh, I guess we slept on a waterbed one time early in our marriage, and she got up the next day thinking she was pregnant because it just affected her so much. And so she flat out refused to go on a cruise. But in 2011, her siblings contacted us about having a sibling get together on a cruise to Alaska. And I'm thinking, well, that's never going to happen. And my wife said yes. And I looked at her like she'd lost her mind. So at that point, I began to understand the pecking order for me and her family. So we went on a cruise to Alaska, and it was just wonderful. It was a tremendous time with her family, tremendous time seeing Alaska and all that it holds. So I brought back this hat from Alaska, and it creates a lot of good memories for us. Her brother has retired in Toledo, and he and his wife Lynn have bought a boat that they have at Powhatan State Park. And just this last week, Lynn invited us to go boating with them. So I told Lynn she would have to talk Sheila into that. So that's the hat for today. All right, just for fun, how about some fun with masks? Here's a picture I found of somebody who creatively made a mask out of a pair of jeans. And top picture is, I don't know if it protects anything, but sure is nice of you to a coffee shop or, well, you can't go to a coffee shop now, but if you have to drink coffee or something, you can just unzip the fly and there you go. Anybody interested in that one? I don't have the pattern, but you might want to consider that. And then how about this one? Anybody recognize who that is? It's supposed to be Vincent van Gogh, who famously was supposed to have cut off his ear. And there you go. That's a problem with the mask. He says, oh man. Exposing everyone and being exposed. So that's fun. That's fun with masks. All right. So, well, a do not be surprised moment for today. Remember, we've been talking about do not be surprised at what this world does. And once again, I was listening to KDKA radio this morning, and they mentioned the comparison between Vietnam and the COVID-19 deaths. And you can watch the replay of yesterday if you missed it. It's not even a good comparison. But the messages I hear from the world is about power and control. And so one of the messages is we can beat COVID-19. We can beat it. We just got to stick together and do the social distancing and keep as many people alive as possible until we get the solution, and the solution is a vaccine. So the upside down world thinking, and I've talked here at Newsong about the difference between God's perspective is right side up, the world and the sinful nature is upside down. And so the upside down thinking is the soon solution is a vaccine. And I won't even get into some of the issues with the vaccine, but the world is looking for a solution, and they're putting their hope in the idea that if we get a vaccine, then we can solve this problem by making people immune to it. And so man's upside down thinking is about power and control. We think from a human standpoint that we have the ability, or even beyond that, the responsibility to take control. And that's just not ever going to happen. I think a lot of the fear that we see in our world today is because we think we have control and we have lost control. So COVID-19 is shaking us because we can't control it. With the general flu that comes every season, we think we have control because we have a vaccine. And so if people die, it's because they didn't get a shot or, for whatever reason. But the reality is there's tens of thousands of deaths every year to the flu. So power and control. We think we can beat is COVID-19. But God's right side up thinking, the truth is, human beings are not in control and never will be. We may feel like we're in control. We may have a sense that we're in control, but we're not in control. That's in God's job description. Our responsibility is to turn to God, honor Him, surrender our desire for control, and then align with Him. So what about, instead of a vaccine, what if we as humanity decide that we're going to live a healthy lifestyle and build up our immunity in the way that God has designed, with eating in healthy ways, exercising, fasting, which is one of the keys to keeping the toxins down and your immunity up. What if we did it that way instead of a short-term, quick kind of give me a pill kind of thinking? So we should not be surprised because mankind wants power and control. Another we should not be surprised moment about power and control is that this idea that the message we hear, we can turn the economy back around. We can turn it around. We just need to pull together and do the right things. Sheila was listening to a presentation yesterday by I don't know who the man was, but he posits that the world will probably face an economic collapse worse than 1929 that ushered in the Great Depression. And if you've been on here for any length of time, and by the way, I don't know what color or what gem it is, but this is episode number 25, I believe. So it's kind of a hallmark episode, and hopefully it'll go down in history. But she was saying this man posited that the economic collapse would be worse than 1929, and I've been saying it all along that this is going to get worse, and so he went on to say he predicted the time frame of when the entertainment industry is going to collapse, and then the tourist industry, and the travel industry, and the airline industry, and even the banking industry, and on and on and on it goes, which confirms what I've been saying, is that our response to the COVID-19 has been led by fear and misguided efforts, because fear will lead us to do far worse things than the situation that we're facing. Remember, what is already present, it will be revealed during stressful times. And so that's what we're seeing. So we should not be surprised. Don't be surprised, but don't be afraid either. So I see some other people on here, Jerry and Randy and Michael. Be sure and say hi if you're on here, and Debbie Mazio. So as I was praying this morning, here's what I sense God saying to us today. Which urge or nudge do you follow? Which urge or nudge do we follow? And so I was praying this morning, and then I left the house and I came into my study here at our church facility, all alone, by the way. And this is what I heard, and I forget exactly what I was about to do, but I just sense God saying we have a choice in every moment as to which urge or nudge we follow. Do we surrender to follow God's nudges, to follow in His steps, or do we insist on following our own urges? So I thought this picture was interesting. Somebody said, pretty sure this is the pilot car that we've been following through 2020. And the truck is in a ditch in a flood. Yeah, pretty much. That's what the world, that's what it looks like when you're following the world. So the question is, who are we following? In I find it interesting that the Bible, when it talks about following God, talks about steps. It doesn't talk about leaps or jumps or huge strides. It talks about steps. With Jesus even telling us that we need to become like little children, and little children take small steps. In 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 21, God says through the apostle Peter, "For to this you have been called." I see some other people. My best friend growing up, Jim Scobie, Rhonda is here, John Bush, Rich Offerman. Good to see everybody on here. So, for this you've been called, because Christ also suffered for you, leaving you an example so that you might follow in his steps. So, the question is, which urge or nudge do we follow? Away from God or toward God? And then Galatians 5:25, one of the scriptures that comes to my mind all the time. If we live by the Spirit, let us also keep in step with the Spirit. Our job is to simply keep in step with the Spirit. So which urge or nudge are we going to follow, away or toward God? Life is made of mostly small choices, small steps, small actions, the culmination of which determines really everything that we experience. Life with God, then, walking in step with the Spirit, living in the Spirit, is a series of daily, often small nudges, the culmination of which determines everything. And so it's the choices that we make. And am I going to follow? Oh, yeah, Mike, I'm sorry. It's listed as John M. But Mike and Cindy, good to see you. So which urge are we going to follow our own urge, or are we going to follow the nudge of God? One of the most profound examples in my life was in 2006. We had been meeting in a school, the church we planted here in Pittsburgh, New Song Community Church in 1991. We had met in a school for over 15 years. At the end of 2005, we had moved into the building that we renovated. And life was busy, life was hectic, and I was pouring into people's lives. And in October of 2006, I remember coming home from a pastor's gathering, walking into the kitchen and receiving a note. It wasn't, I don't remember what the note said, but it was from someone in the church, and it wasn't a big deal. But I remember reading that note, and the thought in my mind was, just give up. This is not worth it. This is craziness. Why are you pouring your life into something that it just turns upside down, topsy-turvy, and it really doesn't matter? And I distinctly remember that moment. I had the choice to give in to that thought or to turn to God. And sadly, I gave in to that thought. I remember making the choice. It doesn't matter anymore. It just doesn't matter. And I left the kitchen. It was getting close to dinner time. I remember leaving the kitchen, walking up to the bedroom, laying down in the bed, and curling up in a ball. That was on a Tuesday. Shirley came up and asked me if I'm going to eat dinner. I said no. I stayed in bed. I didn't get up on Wednesday. I just stayed in bed. I canceled every appointment that I had for the week. I canceled, and I just stayed in bed. I got up. I remember getting up for one counseling session that a woman was coming into the office, and as I was listening to her, I remember sitting there trying to help her, thinking, if you knew how bad I am, you would not be listening to me. What I really wanted to say is, you got no problem. What is your problem? Just go home. That was where I was. And so the little choice to give into that voice, to go to bed, to curl up in a fetal position, then basically stay in bed. When Sheila tried to talk to me, I refused. When other people tried to call me, I refused. And just choice after choice after choice that led Every step led deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper into depression. And I was in a hole so deep that by Friday I could hardly pull myself out. And the way that God arranged me to get up, and so I was in this downward fall, and God stopped it. He used a friend of mine to stop it, and I stayed in that hole for 6 weeks because I had made the choice to follow the fear, follow the discouragement, follow the voice of the enemy instead of following Christ. And you see, life is made up of small choices, small decisions, that the culmination of which leads us to what we experience. On tomorrow evening at 7 o'clock, we're going to look at Jonah in the Old Testament, in the extended Bible study right here. And what we see is in Jonah is small choices. God tells him to go to Nineveh. He refuses, goes the opposite way. God tells him to deliver a message. He didn't want to do it. He does it under duress. He's frustrated with what God does, and he ends up depressed under a tree. Why? Because he's choosing to make those small steps. So, again, which urge or nudge do you follow? Away from God or toward God? Let me give you some explanation of it. Which urge or nudge do you follow? Away from God, often we're not even aware it is away from God. When we act out of fear or hurt or discouragement or selfishness, or even what many people call common sense. We follow that nudge or we follow that urge. And so for me, it was just that little moment, acting out of hurt, out of discouragement, out of selfishness, out of seeing it from a human standpoint. But if I want to follow God's nudge toward God, if I'm looking toward God, then I turn to Him to hear what He wants me to do, and then I do it. So turning to God in that moment. So looking back on that moment in October 2006, if I had turned to God and poured out my discouragement, I could have prevented that deep depression that I experienced. If I would have talked to Sheila about it, if I would have come down for dinner, if I would have just made the steps, but every step was going downward. So when you get an urge or a nudge and you're in that moment of decision, are you turning away from God towards your own selfishness, or are you turning towards Him? Another one, away from God leads us to a downward trajectory that spins out of control. And that which causes discouragement and emptiness, conflict with others, and many more that we could name. But in that moment, if I turn toward God, it leads us into being in step with Him that escalates closeness with Him. Now, emotionally, it may not feel, like happiness, but it will give us encouragement and satisfaction and contentment and the ability to love other people, even when they're not very lovable. And then finally, which urge do we follow or nudge do we follow? If it's away from God, it's usually the path of least resistance. At the moment, it seems easier, but it results in life being harder. But if we turn toward God, usually it requires us to go against our natural bent. And in the moment, it seems harder. It requires trust, but it results in life being more meaningful and easier. Doesn't mean it's easy, but it's smoother with God because God is helping us to carry the load and we're around other people. So in that moment, it was the path of least resistance to just go climb in my bed and stay there. But it led to 6 weeks of crawling and just an act of the will trying to get through the depression. But if I had gone against that natural bent, even as hard as it would have been, trusting God, then He could have helped me to get the resources that I needed. The Apostle Paul in Philippians chapter 4, verses 11 to 14, tells us what it's like when we choose the urge or the nudge of God in opposition to the natural. He says, "Not that I am speaking of being in need, although he had been in need, for I've learned in whatever situation I am to be content." Now notice he doesn't say happy, he doesn't say easy, but he says content, satisfied. I know how to be brought low, and his intimation is, and is okay. I know how to abound, and that's okay. In any and every circumstance, every circumstance. So whatever you're going through right now, whatever's happening in your life with all this COVID-19 stuff, whatever's happening economically, whatever you might be struggling with, this applies in every circumstance. I've learned the secret of facing plenty and hunger and abundance and need. He says, either way, the outward circumstances don't touch the satisfaction. And here's the key: I can do all things through him who gives me strength, who strengthens me. I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. So in those moments, I turn to God. And when God is nudging me to do something, I turn to him instead of giving into the urge of selfishness. But I love verse 14, which oftentimes people leave out. Yet it was kind of you to share my trouble. I love that because we need other people. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. If I'm all alone, I can handle it. But really, I'm meant to go through this. We are meant to go through this together. It was kind of you to share my trouble. So what do we do with all this? How do we apply it? Oh, I forgot to put the takeaways. Oh, there it is. Here we go. Here's the application. Remember, this is always about takeaways. Number one, God promises abundant life through walking in step with him. That's God's promise. That's God's desire. He is your loving heavenly dad. He wants you to experience the abundant life, which is satisfaction, contentment, joy, peace, love, all the things that he offers. That's his promise. But we experience it through walking in step with him. Those little choices, those little urges, those little nudges, walking in step with him. And so it's there for us, but we have to surrender control. So as the world is trying to control all this and do it on their own, they're not going to experience it. That's why we see so much discouragement and frustration. Number two, surrender, listen, obey. We around here at New Song, we call that the slow lifestyle. Surrender, S, listen, obey. L and obey, O, slow, S-L-O, is the lifestyle of walking in step. And so when we come to those points of decision, we surrender and say, God, you're in charge. We listen. God, what is it you want me to do? And then we do it. And then number three, pay attention to the urges and nudges. Just pay attention. Have your antenna, have your spiritual antenna as high as you possibly can so that you see what those choices are. Because they're small choices and they're small steps, baby steps, baby steps, baby steps. So pay attention to the urges and nudges and then choose wisely. Well, I hope this is helpful for you. If it is, let me encourage you once again to like and share with those people who will be benefited by it, because we need God's perspective. This is not about me. This is about hearing God's perspective and how he wants us to be thinking and looking. And then join me tomorrow at 7 o'clock for the study on Jonah. You know the story, or you might think you know the story, but there's a whole lot there that God was up to that most people miss. Lord, as we walk through this life, so oftentimes we think that we can leap and jump and make great strides. But the truth is, we recognize, as you say, it really is just the small steps in following you. And we're so awful at it. without your Spirit giving us the nudges and urges. Lord, would you turn our minds to you, our hearts to you, our souls to you? Give us supernatural ears. Keep our antenna high so that we can hear your faintest whisper and follow your nudge to the satisfaction and joy that's there. Thank you for your faithfulness to us. Thank you for your promises. And I pray for each person that's listening that today they would experience that abundant life that you promised as they lean into you, as they listen to you, as they follow you. In the name of Jesus, we pray all these things. Well, thanks again for being a part of this From Where God Sits. And once again, if you have a ball cap you'd like me to wear to handle this hair situation, this Alaska hat is nice. I'm down to my last handful of hats. So if you would like to send me one that has some kind of meaning for you, I promise I'll wear it on air and mention your name, and you'll get all the commercial proceeds from it. All right, love you all. Now let's go boldly be the church as we walk through this Wednesday. Love you. Bye.